Welcome everyone to this special interview as part of a public education campaign by the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court as part of a series. Today with me is a very special guest. I have with me for this very first interview, His Lordship, the Honorable Mario Michel, Chief Justice Acting. His Lordship, welcome and thank you for your time here today and for this drive to reach the people of the Eastern Caribbean.
Thank you, Mrs. Fannis, and I'm very pleased to be here and very happy that Calabash TV has agreed to host us for this first interview and what I hope would be the first in a number of others as part of, as you said, the public education program of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court.
And we'll get to the other activities that you plan, but I want to start with you as Chief Justice. My earliest memory of you is as a youth activist. I think one of the founders of the National Youth Council at the time. It's an interesting time in St. Lucia. And later for me as an educator, as my Minister of Education. So Mr. Chief Justice, you've been in public life for a while and in the fight for justice. Let us walk a bit through that journey, starting with your interest in becoming a lawyer.
You know, my journey in public life can properly be said to have started after I graduated from the university and law school and returned to St. Lucia in 1984. I then commenced my private practice as a lawyer and also commenced involvement in a number of activities, particularly youth development. 1985 had been declared as the International Year of the Youth by the United Nations. And leading up to the year, there were a number of activities bringing young people together. I played a leading role in some of those activities, which led eventually to the formation in April 1985 of the St. Lucia National Youth Council and me elected as its first president. Throughout the period then between 1984, when I commenced legal practice, and 1997 when I entered into government. Those 13 years saw me very heavily involved in civil society organizations, National Youth Council, St. Lucia Guild of Graduates, St. Lucia Bar Association, becoming the president of all of these three organizations at different times. So yes, that is the sort of background that I brought into government and later on, of course, the court.
What inspired you to really get into the legal practice?
From a very young age, people used to say, you know, he'll be a lawyer one day, you know, family members, teachers and other persons who came across me decided that I was going to be a lawyer one day. I took it then to be an acknowledgement of the fact that, you know, I could speak okay. But the actual decision to become a lawyer wasn't made until I was at A-level college between 1976 and 1978. And, you know, everybody there deciding what you're going to do. Generally, when you got to A-level, the assumption was that you would go on to university. Maybe now, maybe later. So as part of that discussion, I sort of, okay, if you do a degree in economics, in French, in something, almost invariably you would have to come into the teaching service and be subjected to the Teaching Service Commission regulations or the civil service and be subjected to the public service regulations. And the profession of the law offered the best opportunity for me to be able to do so. And thus somewhere at A-level college, I decided, well, yes, I'm going to be what people had been saying for a while I was going to be. And yes, I did decide then to become a lawyer, and I've had no regrets about it since then.
That's great. I'm wondering though, as Chief Justice, do you still feel you have that freedom to say everything that you want to?
If one saw the Teaching Service Commission regulations and public service regulations shackle you, the regulations governing the conduct, behavior, and operation of judges straight-jacketed you. But by the time I became a judge, I was in my 49th year and I had worked in civil society organizations, had been in government as as a parliamentarian, as a government minister. And I probably was ready to be shackled. I probably was ready to live a life from home to office and to contribute to a different branch of government, having contributed at the legislative level and at the executive level. I thought, let me complete the third branch of government. And I was ready then to be shackled, even straitjacketed.
That's interesting, but I know it meant another level of contribution based on all of the experience that you've had. Can you give us a sense of how a Chief Justice is selected or appointed?
A Chief Justice is appointed by His Majesty, the King of the United Kingdom, upon the recommendation of the 9 heads of government of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court.
That is a significant appointment coming from the region for that kind of selection. In this role, what are some of the functions that you would have to perform?
Well, as Chief Justice, you are the head of the court, the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, and the head of the third branch of government, the first and second being the legislative and executive branch. You're head of the third branch of government, the judiciary, in not just a country, but in 9 countries. So effectively, you are the Chief Justice of Dominica, you are the Chief Justice of Antigua and Barbuda, and so on, all 9 member states and territories of the court. You are the Chief Justice of each of these 9. So that, yes, that is the primary role of a Chief Justice, to be the head of the judiciary in all of the member states and territories of the court.
I think this is a good time for us to get a sense of a better understanding of the court system. And as we are starting this series, can you tell us the rationale for the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court wanting to engage on this education program?
Yes, well, the rationale is that it is clear that most people do not understand the courts. Most people do not understand the legal system. If you listen to conversations at all levels, from including the highest levels, there appears to be a lack of understanding of what the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court is and what the court system as a whole is. I mean, you might hear persons speak about the judiciary when they do not mean the courts and the judges. They might mean the police and other law enforcement agencies. So I think I regard it as a responsibility to get a broad and general understanding of the court system by persons across the 9 member states and territories. Because I'm sure you might appreciate how little people know and understand. I mean, and this is not to try to condemn or criticize anyone. That's just we have not done enough in the school system, in the public as a whole. And I think the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court must take just as much blame. So yes, this is an effort to correct that wrong on our part.
Yeah, so I'm happy that you're taking the lead in that. And I will give education a buy. A diagram actually pops up in my head from social studies that actually teaches something about that. But again, once you leave that, it's lost if you're not actively engaged in the system. So let's move to try to get a better understanding, not just of, before we get to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, can we start with the structure of the courts?
There are 4 levels of court in our system. There's the magistrates court, which you can call the district courts, which operate in the 2 magisterial districts in the country. The first magisterial district, or the first district as it is called, Castries, Grosley, and I believe Ancillary is part of the first district court. Then you have the second district court, which is headquartered in Vieux-Fort and consists of the courts in Micoud, in Dennery, in Choiseul, Labrie, and Soufrière. These courts are presided over by magistrates. That is the first level, the base level of the court system. Then you get to the High Court, which is presided over by a judge and operates nationally, not within separate districts. The High Court operates nationally, and unlike the district court, which has a limit to its jurisdiction, you can't bring cases to the magistrates court. You can't bring cases to the magistrates court which are indictable offenses, like murder, rape, and so on. These types of offenses can only be tried in the High Court. So the magistrates court is at your base level, which has limited jurisdiction in both civil and criminal matters. At the next level, you have the High Court, which has unlimited jurisdiction. A judge can hear a case to the value of 20 how many ever billion, zillion, or whatever number you want to take it. A judge can hear cases of the most serious type, whether murder, treason, or any type of case. The judge has, or the High Court has, unlimited jurisdiction. So that's the second level. The third level is the Court of Appeal, which hears appeals from decisions of the High Court and of the Magistrates Court. So any decision made by a High Court or a Magistrates Court, or you can say by a judge or master of the Supreme Court or by a magistrate, can be heard by the Court of Appeal. Then you have the fourth level, which is the CCJ for two countries, that is St. Lucia and the Commonwealth of Dominica, and the Privy Council for the other 7 member states and territories, which have not yet gone to the CCJ as their final court. So these are the 4 levels: the Magistrates Court, the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the CCJ stroke Privy Council.
Now, so let's move on to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. How does it function? What is its structure like? I know you spoke about all of the different territories that form part of that, but can you give us further explanation as to the structure of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court?
The 4 levels of the court system: the Magistrates Court, High Court, Court of Appeal, and the highest court, CCJ or Privy Council. Of these 4 levels of the court system, only 2 levels are part of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court comprises the High Court and the Court of Appeal. The Magistrates Court is not part of the Supreme Court, neither is the CCJ or the Privy Council. So the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, made up of the High Court and the Court of Appeal. The High Court sits and operates in all 9 member states and territories, so that you have the High Court of St. Lucia, of Antigua and Barbuda, of Montserrat, and so on. So each state or territory has a High Court, but it is really part of the High Court of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Then you have the Court of Appeal, which is the Court of Appeal of all 9 states and territories, and it operates, it's called an itinerant court. It goes to the different countries to sit on appeals from that country. So we go to most countries 3 times a year, some twice a year, where we go to the country and hear appeals, let's say from Antigua and Barbuda. All appeals from the High Court or the Magistrates Court of Antigua and Barbuda are heard by the Court of Appeal, which physically travels to Antigua and Barbuda, where it sits as the highest court of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, so the general pattern has been the judges of the Court of Appeal who sits at headquarters in St. Lucia. I should say the headquarters are located at the waterfront in Castries, St. Lucia. The Court of Appeal judges, who are all based in St. Lucia, physically travel to the other states and territories to hear cases, appeal cases from those states and territories. We do have a situation of what happened during the COVID pandemic period, where we were not able to physically travel to those islands. So courts started to be done in these countries virtually. And rather than say at this stage, with the end of the COVID pandemic period, of course we know COVID hasn't ended, but the pandemic stage has ended. So although after the pandemic stage ended, we were supposed to resume in-person sittings, we still do sit virtually quite often for various reasons.
Okay, 2 things I just want to make sure we clarify. We've been speaking about member states and territories, and we know there are 9. Can you just name these?
The 6 member states are the 6 independent countries of the OECS. St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis. These are the 6 independent states which are part of the OECS, and they are part of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Then you have 3 British overseas territories. There are probably I think there are 6 British overseas territories in the Caribbean, which would include Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bermuda. But these 3 are not part of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. The other 3 British overseas territories in the Caribbean are part of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. That's Montserrat, Anguilla, and the British Virgin Islands. So these 6 independent states and these 3 British overseas territories together are the member states of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court.
And the judges for the Court of Appeal can be drawn from all of those member states and territories.
They can also be drawn from outside. So when there are advertisements for appeal court judges, they are posted not just on gazettes and so on in the individual states, they also posted on Commonwealth bulletins. So, for instance, right now, we're receiving applications for new High Court judges. From what I can recall, probably as many as 60%, as much as 60% of the applicants have come from outside of the Caribbean. Throughout Fiji and Vanuatu and the Gambia and Africa, Asia, everywhere you have countries which are part of the British Commonwealth, we get applications from these countries. And right now we have a judge from Nigeria sitting in the High Court in Antigua and Barbuda, and we have a judge from the Gambia sitting in the High Court of Dominica. Dominica, yes. And so there's not a restriction that a judge must be from one of the 9 member countries of the court, or even from the Commonwealth Caribbean. A judge can theoretically come from any country once you meet the requirements, at least 10 years as a practicing lawyer in any country of the Commonwealth. And the other requirements, you can sit as a judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. Same thing, mind you, in Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, and so on. Judges are not restricted to only nationals of the territory.
And is it your job to go through those applications and select the High Court judges?
The Judicial and Legal Services Commission is the entity that selects High Court judges and Appeal Court judges. The Judicial Legal Services Commission of the Eastern Caribbean comprises the Chief Justice as chairman, 1 sitting judge of the court, 1 former judge of the court, and representatives, Public Service Commission chairpersons from the territories, from the 9 states and territories on rotation. So right now, we have 2 Public Service Commission chairpersons from Grenada, and I can't remember now the other country. And we have a Court of Appeal judge, a former judge of the Court of Appeal, and I serving as chairman of the Judicial Legal Services Commission. So that is the body that appoints judges, whether High Court or Court of Appeal.
So you were saying that the average citizen is really not clear on the judicial system, and we tend almost to use law, the legal system, the judiciary interchangeably, like they are one and the same. Can you speak first specifically to what is the role of the court in law and order?
And I think you put it almost euphemistically when you say the average person is not clear. I think the average person in all of the territories, states and territories, have very little understanding of the system. And you can't blame to say, well, this is the fault of John or Thomas. As a lawyer, I did quite a few special lectures in secondary schools talking about the courts and the legal profession. I thought the social studies syllabus did not go into sufficient depth to require students to have a full understanding of the system. The legal system of a country comprises several elements. The court system is one element. The offices of the Attorney General, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Solicitor General, all these offices and officers are part of the legal system. The police force, there's several agencies, police force responsible for law and order. All these agencies are part of the legal system of a country. However, the court system is made up of the courts, the High Court, the Appeal Court, the Magistrates Court. All these are part of the court system. The courts themselves and the officers who preside, the judicial officers who preside over them, masters, magistrates, judges, that's part of the court system. And the judiciary is really the judges and magistrates who sit on these cases. It really is what the essence of the judiciary is. But people do misunderstand them. People do take one for the other. I've heard